everyone.
Hello.
My name is Chris Ayers. I've got with me Victor Santana, and we're going to be talking about monitoring Azure OpenAI today. Now, I'm a senior customer engineer at Microsoft on the Fast Track for Azure team, and I'm honored to be presenting with Victor. He's one of the best engineers I've ever met in my life. Victor?
Oh, thank you so much for the words, Chris. Likewise. So it's such of a big pleasure to be here with you today to talking about AI and discovering and learning together about this topic. Appreciate it for the opportunity.
And not only that, we have one of our awesome coworkers, Mark. He's absolutely incredible. He's going to be joining us in the chat, moderating. So feel free to ask those questions. He'll be able to answer them and service them up to us so that we can address them live during the conversation that we have. And so we do have some resources that you can use. We've built a collection of links and learn modules that you can go out and access. We're going to talk about some of this during the session, but go ahead and access that AKA MS link or use the QR code and go look at some of the resources that we share and we'll discuss with you during the course of this session. Now, we've presented some learning objectives in the past about kind of gaining a comprehensive overview of OpenAI and how we monitor it within the well-architected framework. We'll understand a lot of the key operational metrics, and we're going to dive into each of those. How to set up metrics and alerting and SLAs, and then we're going to use some dashboards and some alarms to show you how you can monitor this stuff in real time. Set up those systems so that you're not left holding the bag when things go down. So here's our agenda. And Victor, I know you've helped build some solutions that we're going to look through later. So that's like a mini little diagram, I would say, of some of the stuff we might talk about, right?
Yep. And you are 100% right. And those are the terms and a few items that we are going to cover today about monitoring in general, as you mentioned. And throughout that diagram, we're going to go over the most common, let's say, items that are always coupled together on any AI solution, like APIM, OpenAI, Azure Search, storage accounts, and this type of stuff. And we're going to go over a few of them, going through the common features and how you should be using monitoring and which kind of counters, telemetries we should be taking care of. But even before we go through this, I would start in asking you, Chris, why it's so important for us to know about tokens, quota, and all of those, buzzy words around AI and OpenAI, since we are technically just covering monitoring. Why it's so important for us to know about those topics as well?
Well, that's a great question. So let's get into those terms. So a lot of these terms come from OpenAI, so not just Azure OpenAI, but OpenAI itself. And these don't just apply to the OpenAI models. These apply to almost every ML model we're dealing with. So we're going to be dealing with tokens because this is one of the fundamental measures of how you deploy models, how you are billed against models, how you're throttled against models. So kind of understanding as you interact and use these models, like what tokens means. And so that is really like a unit of text. So when we talk about tokens, that's just kind of an indication of how much text or concepts are being processed, and that's how you measure like what's coming in and what's going out of your application, and that will affect your billing. And that kind of leads into our quotas, and we're going to circle back on these and give them a little bit more context. But every deployment, every model has some sort of defined quota. And this doesn't just apply to models, this applies to like every Azure resource. There's some sort of quota. You can have a maximum amount of something. And so for AI models, this is like the maximum amount of requests or tokens or computational resources that you're using in a given time frame. Underneath the hood, there's hardware there. And these are potentially shared services. And so if you decide to try to consume everything, it might affect your neighbors. And so that's why we put some guardrails and quotas in place. And we'll come back to that. And I know you've dived into this a lot, Victor. Do you want to talk a little bit about models?
Oh, definitely.
We've thrown
Yeah.
that word around a bit.
No, definitely, yes. So in Azure OpenAI, we do offer the majority of, I mean, all the OpenAI models that are currently released, like GPT-3, 3.5, 3.5 Turbo, GPT-4, Ada, text embedding, all of those advanced models. And each one of those models has a different computational way on how to interact with your requests and how it's going to respond. It does offer more or less additional tokens and variables that you can interact with the system, and it has different capabilities around until where and how they can go when we are covering quotas as well. So not all of them offer the same type of quotas, depends on which region you are in Azure and how you are leveraging them. And we do, talking about models and quotas as well, we do control them based on region and subscriptions. So
Mhm.
would you like to use the same subscription, but increasing a little bit the amount of quota you have on a specific model, you would have to deploy Azure OpenAI in different regions under the same subscription. But if you are really concerned about the region and where your data is going to, and you need to increase a little bit more using pay as you go without going too deep on PTU and all of these ways on how to maximize the utilization of OpenAI. So you would have to have more than one subscription to be under the same region. So those are the, I would say, tips and tricks that
Yeah.
we are dealing every single day with our customers on how we can maximize the model utilization and increase the quota and organize how they should be working. And for each one of those deployments, we're going to have an API key. And that is how we measure, right, the amount of tokens you are sending and the responses you are taking back out of the OpenAI.
That's
And you,
one way,
about
because we also support managed identities and Azure RBAC. The original way that people accessed OpenAI is API keys. And, at Azure, we've definitely tried to improve that security and scalability. So we're trying to do more managed identities as we go. Um, and yeah, like that is a metric that we can look at and use. And I think you mentioned, or we're getting to rate limiting. Like as you start exceeding your quota, you might get limited either by how many tokens you're consuming or how many requests you're
exactly.
earlier this week, we actually had some of our coworkers present um, a session on load balancing and scaling Azure OpenAI. So that's another great session you can go that will feed into this one, and they're very related topics. And that does go a little bit deeper into, I have it listed there in the corner, PAYGO and PTU. So if you just consume Azure services and you just want to consume an AI model and only pay for what you use, um, pay, pay as you go. Paygo it's a billing model where you pretty much just get billed for your model
Correct.
consumption. But if you're trying to plan some really enterprise level applications where you need some sort of reliability and dependability, and you can't just um, take some capacity whenever it's available, maybe you want to have some sort of guaranteed SLA and a little bit more reliability in the services being offered. So you can go with this PTU, a provisioned throughput unit, and actually kind of like reserve an instance.
Kind of dedicated solution, right? And since
Yeah,
you mentioned about managed identity, which should be the way to go going forward in Azure, 100% agree on that. Yesterday, we had a great session as well with some other colleagues from our team
yeah.
presenting about securing your AI solution. So if you are interested on diving to the context of managed identity, API keys, the benefit of open identity, and how you should put some guardrails and also hardening your solution using OpenAI, I would highly encourage you to watch the session from yesterday.
Oh, that's a great point. So continuing, just so that we can get to the really good stuff around monitoring. When we talk about tokens, these are the core of everything. So if you're talking about, hey, I want to go do a RAG search, the resource augmented, generation. Maybe you want to have some embeddings or vectorization. Those all use tokens. Like when we're using different models to embed or vectorize our data, um, those use tokens under the hood. like because as you feed text and data into models, it gets broken up into small chunks, and it's not necessarily a word. Sometimes it might be a full word, so as you can see on the screen. Sometimes it might be a number. It could be a symbol or a exclamation point or a part of a word. On average, one token is going to be about 4 characters. And now this is for English. If you're dealing with different models or different languages or Unicode characters, that might vary. And so it's something to be aware of as you're looking at monitoring your solution. A lot of times the concern is you don't want to use up all your tokens that you've allocated, or you don't want to have failures as you're going. And that can be a reason for it. So understanding the impact of tokens, and this includes both your system level prompts and your user prompts, as well as any context you give it and what gets regenerated back to you. Um, and we already mentioned the quotas. These are in place to kind of limit or regulate how many times you're pinging the API and how much text you're sending. If you try to send it the entire encyclopedia, that will that becomes a problem, because it will affect those around you. There's only so much hardware underneath. So like that is where quotas come in to make sure everybody can leverage it and use it without overloading the systems. And so you're going to see TPM, tokens per minute, and RPMs, requests per minute. Victor, I think you already said it great. It's per model, per region, per subscription.
There we
So
go.
if I have a GPT-4 model in East US, and I'm in my prod subscription, and I've used all my quota, like I can't set it any higher. I can't really deploy another GPT-4 in East US. I would have to pick either a different region, like West US, or I'd have to pick a different subscription, or I would have to pick a different model. If I have 1,000 tokens per minute as my allocation, I can have that all in one model, or I could have 2 deployments of GPT-4 that each have 50. But like when I hit my cap, I either have to move regions, move models, or move subscriptions. And so as soon as I hit that limit, if I'm putting out 100,000 tokens per minute and I try to do 120, I'm going to start seeing 429s. So these are HTTP status codes. These are, the 404 not found, 200, everything's great. When you start seeing a 429, that means that you're being rate limited in some way. And this is usually one of the first things people ask us about when they're talking about monitoring. Like, how can I detect when I'm being rate limited? And how can I respond to that? And so those are the numbers you're going to be thinking about. We're going to be thinking about 429s or error codes or retry codes. We're going to be thinking about tokens per minute and understanding our token usage. We're going to be thinking about requests per minute. Are we sending lots of small requests? For the most part, there's kind of a conversion rate. This is kind of a rule of thumb, about 6 RPMs for every 1,000 tokens. So there is some sort of conversion there. But a lot of times when we're talking about this stuff, we start going into Azure API management. This is one of the first solutions that people look at as they start hitting their quota limits and they start consuming all of their models and they want to add more. How do we add additional endpoints, additional OpenAI or Azure OpenAI models to our application without having to go in and change our code all the time? How do we scale our application without making tons of code changes?
Yeah, and most of the time we do not expose the OpenAI API straight to the developers. So there is it depends on how you are going to building the architecture of your software, right? Under the hood, it's a great idea to have API management to control those endpoints for you, even if you need just one of them, because you're gonna you want to be exposing the end API. There are a bunch of API versionings. There is
Mhm.
a bunch of stuff that APIM can bring to you uh, in regardings about how to manage those endpoints altogether, right?
Yeah, because maybe have private communication between your APIM, your
Yep.
API management, and your OpenAI. You can control access. You can API management has so many amazing features around routing and being able to transform your requests. So maybe you can route models by changing the URL endpoint, or you can add additional rate limits or quotas by customer, by application, and by group. You can handle authorization and cache things. And it gives you a ton of really cool capabilities. Um, and
I
I did
agree.
see a question pop up, so I'm just going to go back for just a sec, just so we can talk about it. The tokens, like how do you know how many words a token has, or can you implement things? There are techniques people use to optimize their tokens. They will try to use GPT models to optimize the prompts and the queries to reduce that down to minimize their token usage. I mean, that's a technique. Um, but for the most part, the tokenizer used by OpenAI, the text embedding tokenizer, like they're very optimized to kind of just returning the token space back to you. But it's the same tokenizer used pretty much across all of the models. Like that logic is pretty set in how it is. And so that's why I said these are about rule of thumbs. They're not really something that you're going to go out of your way to calculate every time. There are services that you can go out and get a tokenization of some text, um, but for the most part, this is where that monitoring and using API management comes into
Exactly.
play because you can't always predict with freeform text like how it gets fully calculated every time. Um, so I just wanted to circle back and answer that real quick.
Sure. And that is a great point as well, not extending the question too much. But sometimes, since you mentioned about, reducing the size of the tokens, better manipulating how you're going to interact with the OpenAI, and it's all part of monitoring, I would highly encourage you to do a kind of sanitization around the content that you are going to input to the AI. We keep seeing customers sending HTML content, and all of those HTML tags get injected all together, or markdown files, or
Yeah.
sometimes PDFs. And they do OCR on PDFs, and OCR, it does a great job, but sometimes it get weird stuff from pictures. And it's all part of the work of what knowing your data to get the best of OpenAI, so as a
And
solution.
we're about to show you some metrics that you can look at to help monitor and track that. Like that's part of the point of this. Uh,
Exactly.
and so, going back to API management, we've got all these capabilities. We can route traffic to different endpoints, and that's where backends come into play. Like each OpenAI instance you have would be a different API management backend. And so you can route traffic to the East instance, the West instance, the French Central instance. And so we could have one endpoint that we define to allow traffic for our OpenAI models that are protected and wrapped, and we're using identity, so we don't have to share multiple keys. And you can just hit an endpoint if you're authorized and access it, and it will route that traffic. We actually have a couple of capabilities and solutions to help with this, just putting it in the middle of your solution. And again, we had an awesome session on this just a couple of days ago. So one aspect is we've got some new capabilities coming into API management. There's definitely some capabilities around using circuit breaker or using kind of some load balancing there. Now, this doesn't give you a
Yeah.
ton of logic. It will just understand, hey, there was a 429 here, go start sending traffic somewhere else. So this is a base, idea that you can implement. We have a blog post there. We'll share out these links. The other, and there's more capabilities coming to API management. So I keep following the service because they're really doing some cool stuff. But we also have some team members that have implemented some solutions that give you a little bit more control and a little bit more logic around this, where you can implement some custom policies to have prioritized load balancing. So let's say, and I kind of have on the screen here 3 different priority groups. We've got priority group 1, 2, and 3, and we can actually say we want to have a pay-as-you-go model along with PTU in priority group 1. And if we use all of our PTU up, we can overflow into pay-as-you-go. And if we start getting rate limited, then we can jump to our next priority. So if our app is in East, we're mainly going to hit East. But if we run out of capacity, we'll pop over to West and leverage West while our rate limiting resets in East. So we have multiple techniques to show you, like, hey, we can start adding services into our solution because it's never just OpenAI. Like, it's always something else in there. So let's start talking about that. Let's start looking at this holistic solution. Start looking at, monitoring Azure OpenAI, AI search, API management, some other pieces that go along with it. Maybe with a pretty complex, potentially, solution where we're dealing with on-prem resources and users going through VPNs and express routes, talking to a service that we have hosted in the cloud. We're leveraging Entry ID and app service and API management. And so let's just zoom in on that top box, that top cloud aspect. And so we can see there's a whole bunch of different components here that lead into our whole solution. So, gateways, app services, or maybe it's containers. Maybe we're using AKS or Azure Container Apps, ACA. We've got API management, and we're using managed identities to authenticate across these things. We got private endpoints and VNets talking to OpenAI and Azure Search, and maybe cognitive services. You mentioned OCRing forms and documents and PDFs, or even Word or PowerPoint. We've maybe got management studios where we're doing training and validation. So we have so many different services and capabilities. The underlying thing that we usually use to monitor most stuff is going to be Azure Monitor. Now, is there anything you want to add to this before we move on, Victor?
That's a great point. In Azure, we have a pattern of everything being sent to Azure Log Analytics, which is the kind of the database under the hood of where everything is being saved. And Azure Monitor, it is our main kind of solution in Azure to monitor it all. And for Azure OpenAI, APIM, Azure Search, and all of those different components that we are dealing here, they all end up going to Azure Monitor at the end of the day, right? And as I mentioned, they will all be saved inside of the Azure Log Analytics. And in the log analytics, there is a common way on how you can interact, create dashboards, create graphics out of it, have your own queries to extract what you are looking for. There is a ton of ways on how the data will be saved. And each product gonna save their content in a different way. Like it's the same product, but different tables, different columns that you can navigate, do join between the content. You can, let's say, do a join between, let's say if you have a problem in a very specific period of time with OpenAI throwing 429s, and you would like to condense that visualization between Azure OpenAI, APIM, and your app service from where the request is being originated, it's possible to combine all of those three together in an inner join query using Azure log analytics and put all of that in a single dashboard. All of this, it's possible.
So, and you've touched on it. So the Azure platform itself, so our underlying storage and our underlying compute, and if you have that app service, if you have the network, all of those type of statistics are going to be sent to Azure Monitor. So you can look at individual metrics, you can look at individual logs and audit trails. If you have VMs or other infrastructure that you've built out, or even ExpressRoute, things like that, you can send those. And then as you move up the stack, you can even implement and instrument your applications to send your data and your logs. This supports open telemetry. This supports application insights. All of those great APM tooling that you're using today, so that you can understand that when you're getting events and requests, and then it implements distributed tracing, so that you can take those requests from your application, correlate them with your infrastructure, correlate that with the underlying Azure platform requests, and get application insights, container insights. You can run workbooks and dashboards or Power BI, Grafana. And so this is what we're going to leverage. And we're gonna start showing some of these things. But what are those core metrics that we really care about when we're dealing with Azure OpenAI? We define some terms. How can we take those terms with Azure Monitor and start tracking our requests, our tokens? So we've got some metrics that are serviced that are or surfaced that you're going to be able to see through your Azure OpenAI. And this applies to if you use pay as you go or if you have a PTU thing. So you can start seeing how many requests are you doing? And this will be a count of your requests over a period of time. So you can start tracking, are you approaching your requests per minute? Have you allocated enough quota to your resources for your application? So you can track that as requests start coming into the application, get routed down to OpenAI. Um, this goes back to that question around how can you be sure about maybe how many tokens are in your prompts or your context. We can look at the processed prompt tokens. So every request that comes in that's like system prompt, you are an AI assistant, user prompt, how do I do this awesome thing? What is the best taco? Something like that. Answer: all tacos. In all honesty, they're delicious. But like this will show you that measure, this sum of processed input tokens, so that you can kind of monitor how that goes along. Do you want to talk a little bit about like completion tokens and how those differ, Victor, from the prompt tokens?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. So in Azure OpenAI, as Chris is mentioning, we have those counters, those under our metric system. And when we have the process prompt token, that is the amount of tokens that you are sending to the AI. Those are when you are typing your request, it's a combination of your system token plus the user token, because usually in an application, you're going to have your kind of prompt to flow way on how to combine and concatenate what you are imposing to your, let's say, chatbot behaves, plus what your user is going to add to the chatbot. So those two combined gonna be your process prompt token, and depends on how your application will be behaving and communicating and getting answers back. Now it's up to your application. You might go under somewhere else, a database, getting context, adding additional information to get a more accurate response back of your system, right? So, and then all of that that you are sending to the OpenAI, that's going to be your process token. The generated token, it is what the AI created by itself as an answer to your request. Then those two combined and together, like the input and the output of the system, this is what we call it as inference tokens. And those three together, they are the most useful way on how we have it for you to measure and monitor the utilization of an OpenAI endpoint. That those three are the most common ways on how you can interact, and that goes back to the question, right? So how can you monitor? How can you precisely know how much token you have per minute, how many requests you have per minute? So then I would say those four initial counters, they are the most useful ones.
Not everyone fine tunes. I know that
Yep.
this is a capability that we offer though. So if you have a model and you want to fine tune it, you can actually track, and look at the number of hours that you've been fine tuning things. So if you have pipelines that automate this, you can monitor and track that. But as Victor said, those first four and especially the middle three are the ones that are going to give you just the most insight into what's happening. Now, you can take that a step further. So, our PTU models, where you can have this provision throughput, they offer some additional metrics that you can't find in just the normal pay as you go models. And there's actually a separation here. So, our time to response, this one is available on just PTU and PTU managed instances and deployments. So you can look at the latency from when you've submitted your tokens and when you start getting something back. And this lets you gauge information about your prompts. The other two the provision managed utilization and the cache match are only for provision PTU managed instances. So, how much is our utilization? We've said we want a certain amount of utilization or a certain amount of provisioning. How much of that are we using? And then are we leveraging caching, and what is that kind of cache match rate? So these are some of the metrics that really apply to a solution that are just part of the picture. This is the OpenAI part of the picture. You still need to look at the bigger overall solution. And so that's why we're going to switch it over to Victor now to start talking through a solution he's built so that we can see these metrics in action.
There you go. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so what I have done here before I get started showing the overall idea of what we built, I would like to resurface on the our official learning collection that we created together, Chris, for the Azure OpenAI monitoring. All the links, the content, the knowledge that we are transferring throughout this session today, they are in those extremely useful links under this collection. So it's part of the QR code as well that you guys use it at the beginning. And this is part of the presentation today. With that being said, all the counters that we just went through, they are part of our Azure OpenAI official documentation. This is a dashboard that I'm going to go a little bit deeper around how to create one and how you can organize your data between applications, between all those components that needs to be tied together. About the counters specifically, they are all here on this table with their own description that we just try to demystify what they are. That's pretty much it. This is how you can get it set up. I'm going to show that as well right now. So with that being said, let's get started. So in Azure OpenAI, when after you deploy the Azure OpenAI in your subscription, you're going to have a view like this. Now, under this view, for you to enable the telemetry and monitoring, you're going to go under diagnostic and settings.
And this
And you
is
go
a
ahead, please.
diagnostic settings is something on pretty much every Azure resource, right? Like this is
Absolutely, Chris. Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
this is available on every single Azure resource. Of course, the content that each one of them gonna be monitoring and adding to your Azure Log Analytics workspace will differ, of course, right? So a
Yeah,
storage account will have a completely different counters and tables and logic behind of what's being monitored comparing with Azure OpenAI, for instance.
perfect.
But you are 100% right. And then I created that entry for the sake of this demo. I'm going to click on editing. And when you are creating a new one, that's the view that you have. You're going to click there. You're going to pick what you would like to monitor. On this case, I select it all. And then I choose which log analytics workspace where I would like to be saving my content. It can also be saved on an Azure storage account, Event Hub, and send the content straight to a few other partner solutions available in Azure.
Mhm.
But yes, as you can see, that's pretty much it. So I would say the most common option here would be sending to a log analytics workspace.
Yeah.
And now after you get that name, not after, I mean, the metrics are available for you for a small period of time, not forever, as you can set up your log analytics to hold that up. But telemetries are the counters that we just spoke about, where you can see all the utilization of your Azure OpenAI. For instance, if I would like to see processed inference tokens, like if I click on it, by default, I believe it's looking for the past 24 hours up here. And this is what I have been using in the past 24 hours. If I do go up, I can add another metric, for instance, and I can look at, let's say, let me get another one. Blocked calls. This is those 429s that we spoke about it. So now I have the blocked calls in kind of magenta color here. We have 14K of requests with blocked calls and 2 million a kind of inference token the past 24 hours. We're going to go over this a little bit more details in a second, but that's pretty much where you can change and customize all the looking and using those counters. For instance, I can change it to successful calls. So up. Yeah. Then we have 12K successful calls and 14K around of the 429s. The reason why we have that graphic and the reason why you see that kind of volume here, it is because I created a JMeter template on my local computer, and then I was feeding in the system today just to have some graphics to show you what.
Yeah,
So
we're essentially we're load testing the
yes.
solution so that we can see the traffic. Perfect.
Exactly. And then when we were loading testing the system, I was sending to the APIM instead of sending it straight to the Azure OpenAI endpoint. And then my APIM, as Chris was mentioning, I set it up to be using managed identity to communicate straight to the OpenAI endpoint privately, pretty much. And
Nice.
that's what we have here. Okay, with that being said, let's move on. So we spoke a little bit about the counters that we have available on Azure OpenAI. And before we move on, I would like to show you how I did create the module. This is for the sake of the demo. I'm using GPT 3.5 Turbo. When I created the deployment, I added 10K of requests, and when the slice is on 10K, I do have 60 requests per minute until I will start receiving the 429s, right? Those that we spoke about it, about quota utilization. So this is a nice way on how you can see how that works. If I move that to the right, it increase the request per minute alongside with the amount of tokens that I can send to the system. So if you want to be conservative and don't spend too much money on a, let's say, on a demo solution or test environment, you can be aggressively pulling or that to the left or to the right, and then you're going to be able to define your model here. The reason why I put 10K was literally to show you failed requests in the graphic. So it let me, it's a little bit easier, you don't have to push the system too much in order to see those 429 going up in the graphic, in the dashboard.
Perfect.
That was the reason.
Perfect.
Awesome. With that being said, Azure APIM, it is one of the components that we commonly see with customers in an AI solution. So this is the Azure APIM dashboard in Azure Portal. And a common way on how there are Azure APIM has the same logic of diagnostic and settings where you can come here, click editing, and enable the logs. This will tell you capacity of the gateway itself. If the gateway it is under pressure, it's gonna tell you the amount of WebSocket connections. It's gonna tell you a good amount of stuff on how your APIM is behaving, but it will not show you how the request looks like, if the request had failed, like I would say a kind of tracing way on how to see the application behaving when the connections and the request pass through the gateway. In order for you to have a deeper analysis around this, we do offer application insights alongside with APIM. You just have to create an application insights in Azure Dashboard. In order to do it, it's really easy. Click create an application insights like this one. Then you go to APIM, go under application insights, click add, and then you're going to pick the one that you just created. Once you have done it, then you're gonna see a graphic like this. It's loading up. But as soon as it loads, you're gonna see the requests going through, the flow of the requests, how long each request is taking, if it's 429, how many times the 429 had happening the X amount of time. Like for instance, I can go to transaction search. I will look for the past 24 hours.
I
This
think
is
I think this is great because a lot of people will see that diagnostic saying and think this is all I need and not realize or get frustrated that they're missing part of the picture because they don't have the application insights in there. So I like that, you've taken time, kind of pause and go, hey, let's go get that piece and wire it up so we can see it.
exactly. You are 100% correct, Chris. And then throughout the graphic here, we can see the availability of those requests, the dependency, meaning what else that request depends on. It has a single backend, multiple backends. These are a few requests that I sent. Some of them, it is just probing to check if it's technically up and running. Some of them were like failed requests. When the request takes, let's say, it fails with 429s and so on. This is the raw view of the requests. I'm going to click, those are all availability.
You,
Let's see
you
if I
can
have one that it's
you
not.
can go to failures on the left and like just see some
Better,
failure ones.
better. Great,
Yeah,
great idea. Thank you, Chris.
boom.
If I go under failures, we see we have that same amount of K utilized in the counter that I was showed a second ago. And then if I click on it, then we're gonna see on our right, client connection failures. This is when I was sending the load test. If I stop in the middle, the connection never get finished. And then you have a stale connection going from the client, and then it gives us the signalization of saying it's a client connection issue. But in reality, I know what exactly ended up happening. That was me interrupting the load test in the middle. And if I click in all of them was the status 429, as we just mentioned. If I click in one of those, it's gonna give us the full request, right? How the request looks like. This is one of them. Was a post method going to Azure APIM. This is the endpoint that it was reaching out. This is the Azure
The
this is
back
the
end.
Azure, yeah, the backend that was being used. And then we have the operation name was chat completions create. So we have a good amount of details, the size of the request, the response size as well. So it gives us a kind of tracing capability of exactly what's going on. And it can give us a good, nice way to understand if which backend are consuming more or less on each region. I know, I mean, we might be repeating ourselves too much here, but on Monday we had a great session about load balancing. And on that session, they went over about having multiple backends using many different ways, including APIM. And this is a nice way on how we would be able to visualize where those requests are going, how long they are taking, and what were the response on each one of them. It going even further, if you have PTU and pay as you go, and if you'd like to use pay as you go as your backup plan of your PTU environment, you can have two backends on your APIM, and then you can clearly see when one of them are going beyond of the expected utilization and the connections falling back to the second option. So this is a nice way on how you can view the whole overall utilization of your solution throughout APIM. You can see performance, you can see the counters when we have more or less, how long those requests were taking to the backend to respond on average on a specific period of time, and so on. I
Uh,
will show those in a dashboard in a second. Go ahead, Chris, please.
no, I was going to say with APIM, API management, there are some more advanced logging and monitoring techniques. I think we have a link that we're going to share with that. I don't know how deep we're going to dive into it, but sometimes you can take the event stream to like an event hub and do some advanced processing on it. So if you need to do something like billing, but billing by different departments or applications, there's things
Projects.
you can
Yeah.
do with those type of events.
Definitely. And yeah, again, it's technically not part of the presentation, but what you are saying, it is definitely what I did here. You in APIM, you can create multiple different products. I create one here, and that's how I am evaluating technically trying to combine the cost utilization based on API keys that you can create on APIM, and then throughout those, you can define the API that you are exposing and control all of it, and combining with Event Hub and all of that. The
Yep.
amount of things that you can do, the sky is the limit. 100% right, Chris.
I mean, obviously, we
Okay.
like service because it's just such a core part of what we we do.
Yes.
Please keep going, because this is great.
Definitely. Thank you. So, and then we also have this is our this is the Azure Search, a core functionality of any, I would say, chatbot or AI solution relying on GPT, right? It means that most of the time you're gonna bring your own data, right? So you're gonna not just making the AI and the model answer by itself with the original content that it was pre-trained, but you also would like to bring your own data. And then Azure offer the Azure AI Search to be your indexer, where we're gonna go through a storage account, or there are some other connectors around it where you can set up the Azure to vectorize and import your data. You just would have to click on this button. We may not have enough time on this presentation to go over the technical details here, but you can research about it. It's pretty easy. And then it's going to ask, where is the storage account that you would like to bring your data? And then you're going to do the setup. It's going to pre-populate the content for you. Now your application can use, I would say, a concept named RAG, where it's going to use the chunks and all those tokens in a group of chunks that Chris was explaining in the beginning of the session, where having those chunks inside of an indexer, you can better utilize the content that you are bringing to your AI solution.
So
With that,
embedding and vectorization.
there we go. You are embedding and vectorizing the content in the search. And once you have it done, then you can query the content throughout the Azure search, and going back and forth with OpenAI as well with a kind of enrich process. And then your users would be able to ask questions to the AI, to a content that was produced by your company. So a content that the AI probably for sure was not aware about it.
Yeah.
But with that being said, the Azure Search, it is another component inside of your solution. And as we mentioned, it has to be monitored as well. Same idea, same logic. Again, you go to diagnostic and settings, set up the Azure log analytics here. Once you get it done, then you have the metrics. So metrics, actually, you have it or out of the shelf, right? You don't have to set up anything, but I
Yeah.
truly recommend going to diagnostic settings for you to control for how long you would like to save that content, and then it becomes part of your company. Later on, you can even export that content from the log analytics to a storage account, to have a cheaper solution and host that for X amount of years, depends on
So,
how your company goes around it. Go ahead,
but
Chris.
what you're saying is, and just to reiterate,
Please.
out of the box, you get some metrics. Like you can come and look at these metrics without doing diagnostic settings. But that is when you're looking at this one resource, you can see the metrics. What we want to do is we want to have a monitoring solution that aggregates all of the different data sources we're talking about, our AI search, our APIM, our OpenAI, our application, and we point them all at the same diagnostic settings, all at the same log analytics or Azure Monitor endpoint. And now we can look at these metrics side by side in one place. We can make a dashboard or a query that goes, when my user sessions go up, what's the impact on my OpenAI response times? Or what's the impact on my search index response times? Or Are we getting a problem where we're not finding documents in our AI search? So we could come here and just look at this one search thing and run this metric, but we want to step back and have it as part of a single pane of glass.
Definitely, Chris. And that's exactly what were the idea here. So we went through OpenAI metrics to APIM metrics to application insights. And now we are back to the metrics of Azure Search. And you could use, for instance, this is when I was feeding in my system today to crawl a good amount of documents, like almost 1,500 documents here. So I would be able to search throughout them when I'm consuming the content in my application. And now, as you mentioned, we are able to create a single dashboard, a single pane of glass with all the metrics that truly matters for us. So the way we did it, you can just go here in Azure, in the default home of Azure, and you can create a new dashboard. And then you're gonna have something like the one I just have here. This is the default Azure dashboard, okay, where we have all the contents and the most recent resources that I created and I was browsing around. And then once you create your new dashboard, you will be able to pick all the counters that matters for your visualization of your solution. So this could be my chatbot application, whatever. So that would be the name of this dashboard, and then it would be looking in a single pane of glass with all the components that matters for this single application. With that being said, those are the counters that truly matters for me for OpenAI, which is one of those components that it's a dependency inside of my application. So here I created an inference token. Here I split it between what is the completion tokens, meaning what the AI generated for me in the past 24 hours, and what I send to the AI. This is the processed token. This is what I send to get a response back. Since I was loading testing, and in my load test, I just put hello, I am whatever. That's why the amount of tokens
Yeah.
that I sent, it's way higher, the tokens that it answered back, because it was just saying, hi, I am a chatbot, how can I help you? That's the reason why.
Yep.
And then under here, we can better see the successful calls compared with the blocked calls. And
Mm,
this is pretty much because when I on JMeter, I'm not going to go over what it is. It's a stress test, so very common
mm,
solution available on internet. And then pretty much on JMeter, sometimes I were pushing the system too much, creating some spikes, and then I go above the limit of my deployment. Then we have the red line, and this is when I was handling to keep under the expected utilization all the time. Then I was not going above the limit, meaning I was not reaching the 429s and none of that was happening.
yeah.
Going further, this is under the same dashboard. We have Azure API Management. And here I added one counter that is, in my opinion, extremely useful. APIM has different SKUs, like anything else in Azure, right?
Yeah.
And throughout those SKUs, you have different types of capacity that you can go over. So my APIM, it is a dev deployment because it's just a demo. On the dev deployment, we have like a small box to have the APIM running on top of it. So, and this is when I was stressing the system, right? So I can see how much of the overall capacity of the APIM I was consuming. So at some time here, I was above of 15% of utilization.
And
This is, go ahead, please, Chris.
oh, I was just gonna say, like at some organizations, they might have one large API management for their entire org. And so if you're not monitoring that capacity as you start onboarding new applications, you might start seeing that average capacity go up and up. And then that's where you need to assess what SKUs you're running, if you need to split out your APIs and your applications into different deployments or resources. Um, But this is just going back to understanding monitoring and trying to make your applications resilient by paying attention to the things that can affect it. So
Definitely,
great.
yes. You got it. You nail it. And then on the right side, we have backend requests, meaning how long it was taking to go back and forth to OpenAI. You see this graphic, you're going to realize it's taking a huge amount of time for an HTTP request that was intentional for the presentation. I I mean, I squeezed my PTU utilizations. I was going way beyond of the limit, and then those requests, in order to have a successful response, it takes a little bit longer. For that reason, you're going to see requests that reach, let's say, 800 milliseconds. But this is a nice way on how you can see under the same solution how long it's taking from the backend requests of APIM. Same thing for Azure AI Search. In order for you to bring your own data to your AI solution, you have to go over thousands of documents and then you have to index them. You have to split them in chunks. Chunks will have sizes. Depends on the size, amount of document that you are bringing. If you are doing OCR on the fly, leveraging the capability of AI search to evaluate a PDF, look at pictures, convert the content of those pictures to text, and then save them inside of your solution. So all of those will create counters inside of the Azure AI solution. And this is a counter where it shows me how long it took to process documents. And then I added, actually, apologize. This is the amount of documents that were processed today when I
Mm.
was just like stressing the system. And then I was literally, apologize, drag and drop a good amount of documents to a storage account and forcing the index to be executed.
Yeah,
So
it's a nice service that's part of a lot of these solutions. Cool. What
yes,
else? Like what else do we got? So
one
we've got
thing that
great
it's
dashboard.
nice to say, but we don't have here to show because I didn't have enough time to send a good amount of query to see the latents and so on. But when you are in a real world, you're gonna have queries being sent to your AI search, of course, and then that counter will go up as well, and it can show you the latency on the response time of those queries.
And so not only do we have a cool dashboard that can pull together all these different data sources, we could leverage a workbook as well. Like if we were having multiple applications or we were focused in one region or another, we could pull those in and have how we troubleshoot or how we, look at poor performance. And you can also have those metrics trigger alerts. So really,
Definitely.
really cool stuff.
Yeah, alerts, it's a extremely important point because that's the way you can have reaction to something when it goes bad, or you can be literally alerted by an email, whatever solution, SMS, whatever you would like to have
Yep.
for receiving an alert back out of the system without reaction as well. So besides everything that we covered, there is like once again, we condensed all the content throughout this collection, and in that collection there are a few items that I would like to highlight, like Langfuse, right, Chris?
Yeah.
And when
Cool.
go ahead if you want to talk about it.
No, I was just saying it's a really cool solution. This is something that our advocacy team actually helped produce the Langfuse on Azure. And so this is a container you deploy out, and you can see all of the really cool metrics that you're getting. And this is pulling in things like latency and token usage, and it monitors that to give you some additional details.
Yeah, the usage of tokens, it is what it buys me out for
Mm.
using that solution, and I truly love it. That's why we brought that up here for you to understand that there are even beyond options, right? Options beyond of what we just showed you up on how you can better utilize and visualize what you're looking for. So besides that, we were talking about creating dashboards and so on. There is this blog that it goes over how to create a workbook, which is something that Chris just mentioned. I added the link inside of our collection as well, because it's important for you to have the dashboard the way we want. Besides this one, oh, okay, that's important to mention as well. In
Mhm.
your AI solution, there are many different types of SDKs that you're going to be leveraging for you to interact with OpenAI. If you are coming with LangChain, if you are on C# world, you're going to be using Semantic kernel. Each one of those SDKs and run timers that you are utilizing under your solution can provide even deeper information out of your system itself, of how fast it's going to concatenate those prompts, how your prompt solution is actually behaving. You can have counters that goes way beyond. So this is a good link that I added there
We
regarding about telemetry and semantic kernel. Go ahead, Chris, please.
I was going to say we might be able to even add. I know that there are some solutions that do evaluations. So as you're
True.
interacting with your chat and OpenAI solution, it might not only monitor token usage, it might monitor the accuracy of the response or the relevance of the response. So as you're evaluating your prompts and you're changing them, you might want the response that's 80-90% accurate but uses half the tokens, um, getting a response to you. And so
True.
that's where we have, and we can probably add that to the collection. There's an evaluation engine that you can leverage.
There is. You are
It
100% right.
plug right into your pipeline, and so every time you're checking in code and you're working on it, it'll run an eval, and then you can see that result. Um, it's some really cool stuff.
100% agree, Chris. We can add it. We're gonna add that to the collection as soon as we are done here. Definitely, I 100% agree. And talking about evaluation, when we are going over fine tuning, it's a little bit off topic here, but that's a must, right? There is no way if you are fine tuning the model for you to know if you are reaching the desired answers without evaluating the answer that you are taking after fine tune the model. That's definitely a must. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, this is for Azure ML. There are a bunch of customers that they are combining nowadays the open source models with OpenAI models and leveraging Azure ML to do it. So this is a great link on how you can monitor the generative AI applications if you are using Azure ML as your endpoint. So these docs go over the majority of the metrics and the models that you can use all combined. I would highly encourage you to go over this one as well. About Open APIM, this is how you can monitor a published API. This is going over in application insights that we just showed you up and metrics of your API capacity, requests, and all of it in a single pane of glass as well. This is how you can import Azure OpenAI as a REST API inside of your APIM. So if you love the idea of leveraging APIM in your AI solution, this is the way to go. That's the easiest step-by-step tool that you're gonna just have to go through a few steps to download the OpenAI specification and import that as an API on Azure APIM, and then
It's
you're gonna end up having an API like this. Where is my link?
And this is important because if you haven't used API management a lot, you can create products and APIs, and then you can create each individual endpoint with parameters and response types. And if you had to manually go through and do this, you would not manually go through and do this. And so that's why this documentation is super important. It's a great, easy way to just import it with just a couple of clicks. So
Definitely. And then for everything that we cover and spoke about Azure AI Search, they are documented here under the same collection, going over all the metrics, all the details that it shows up available under the diagnostic and settings and also in the telemetry. Then we have in case you would like to go a little bit beyond, So you can use queries. If we have enough time, I can show you one or two of those for you to see how to create queries, take data. This is, you can grab those queries, run those from Log Analytics. This is using KQL. This is our querying language, Kusto querying language
Super.
for Log Analytics. Extremely useful and very, very easy to use. So then you can mix and match those with your idea, and you're gonna have very fun results out of it.
If you're used to something like SQL or even Splunk, there are documents like in the Learn on how to do SQL to KQL and things like that. So you can take the concepts and languages and queries that you're already used to and be able to leverage them effectively in KQL. And KQL is pretty much tied to all of our services, from the security side with things like Sentinel to the monitoring side with Azure Monitor and all of the insights and applications.
Yeah, this is sort by duration time that I did today when the operation was query.search. And then just for us to have a kind of idea of how that looks like, this is technically the query string that I went through. This is how long it took and the amount of requests we have. You can do your query here, combining those, and you're gonna have like this type of visualization. So that's pretty much it, Chris.
Hey, that was an amazing demo, Victor. Wonderful walkthrough. Why don't we start summarizing things?
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So we went over a lot of the core concepts of Azure OpenAI. We really kind of tried to dive into the idea of tokens and quotas and models and why those are so important. I think we probably talked about it in every single one of these FTA lives we've done around load balancing and identity
Yes.
because they're just so fundamental to these concepts that we're talking about. And then we dived into some really awesome specific metrics and counters that we can leverage around Azure OpenAI, around API management, around AI search, and then you put it all together into an awesome dashboard and went back through all of the great learning collection that we've put together. So all those links are there. We can go out, read a little bit more in depth, review the content and scan it. That was wonderful. I don't think we missed anything. I think we hit most of it. So,
Yes, we did it.
is there anything you want to add, Victor, before we wrap it up?
No, just say thank you to you. It's such of a big pleasure to be with you here today. I truly mean it. It's amazing for having the opportunity to do that together, research together, get the whole thing done together. So it was an honor for me, Chris. Appreciate it.
Oh, the honor's mine, my friend. Like this is part of the joy of the team we're on, Fast Track for Azure.
Yes,
We've got
definitely.
a lot of other resources out there for everybody, so please go check out AKMS FTA Live. You're not only going to be able to click on the Watch Live, which will take you to Reactor and let you see shows like this. You can watch the recordings, and then there's a whole bunch of other resources and sessions that we've done in the past that we grouped together. So I want to thank everybody for spending the last hour with us talking about monitoring Azure OpenAI and solutions around that. And please go watch some of the other sessions we've done. I think it will really help you as you're building these solutions. And thank you, Victor.
Thank you all. Thank you, Chris. Bye.
Bye all. Thank you for